And before we get into the panel discussion, I want to give you a few glimpses what this event is about and why we as Varied Berlin, as a wearable tech company, got into the topic at all. So we have been working on wearable electronics, and maybe you know that we are also hosting a wearable tech conference, physical event every year since 8 years. We have been working on wearable electronics for people with disabilities for their sexual pleasure and wellness, sexual wellness. And that's how we discovered that there's a huge field that needs much more and deserves much more attention, like the sex tech field, and that it could be our responsibility to try to integrate it in existing industries and take it out of the shadow, give it a little bit more spotlight, the whole topic, and tackle the challenges and stigmas that we immediately saw when we first got in touch with the topic. So that's why we got gathered tonight for the panel discussion, experts from cross-industrial backgrounds that can help us give a glimpse on how to solve these challenges and make this industry more broadly accepted as a valuable thing, as something that's not shady, as something that helps people, just like other devices do. So what is sex tech? It is a technology for sexual pleasure, medical, but it also includes medical, FemTech. It's also part of the technology field, like it's part of Internet of Things, sensors, apps, software development. And just imagine how valuable sex tech could be in a future where instead of taking drugs, you get prescribed a sexual device that helps cure your conditions. And more than that, also sex tech is an educational industry. And now to get into our panel discussion, we gathered a few experts from like Megwyn. She will help us understand how the human body works related to sexuality. Rachel is experienced in the field of PR and communication, and she's specialized on topics that touch sexuality. Jeff brings in a perspective from the medical field, that will be also very interesting. So I'm now going to introduce each of our panelists one by one, and they get 2 minutes to present what their background is. So I would like to start with Rachel Johnston. Rachel, maybe if you could go into presentation mode already, that would be great. If you could share your screen already, and then we go live. Rachel oversees the health and wellness roster of clients at Rebellious PR. So she brings a particular focus on sexual and reproductive health. So Rachel is a true marketing expert, and in her free time, Rachel occasionally does stunt work for film and TV in Hollywood. Okay, great. Rachel, if you do not have a presentation slides, then we can go live like that. And if you, just go ahead.
The screen sharing's disabled.
Ah, okay. Okay, now it should work. Okay. Thanks for being with us, Rachel, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. As Thomas mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Rebellious PR and Consulting, and I also specialize in sex tech and sexual health and wellness at our agency. So some of the work that I've worked on includes launching Laura DiCarlo, who had a significant story in the sex tech world because of CES excluding sex tech products from being allowed in the awards, and which we were successfully able to overcome. I also worked on the launch of Emmy, which is a brand new birth control technology, and then other consumer sexual health products like Crave, which is famous for the Vesper, as well as Cute Little Fuckers, which is a gender inclusive sex tech company, and makes really fun, non-traditional products for people with different abilities and different genders. So I really love and am passionate about sex tech and telling the stories of the incredible people who work in this industry. I think that I've met some of the most fascinating and innovative people working in health and wellness. So very happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks, Rachel. Looking forward for the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Next, we have Megwyn White. Megwyn is a certified clinical sexologist based in New York City. Thanks for joining us here. She's the director of education at Satisfyer. And in the past, Megwyn was focused on holistic body-related fields such as yoga or somatic healing. Did I pronounce it correctly? Megwyn, if you want to share your screen, the stage is yours. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm very excited to be here. And so just as a brief introduction, I've been working with Satisfyer, which is basically an award-winning sexual wellness company that specializes in basically products for everyone, for women, for men, for couples, for gender non-conforming people. We're probably best known in the industry for our air pulse technology and for a product called the Satisfyer Pro 2, which really kind of revolutionized the industry, not only because the technology was so different in how it interacted with the body, but also the focus that we had specifically on creating access for people that didn't have, where many of these products were priced out of people's budgets. And so this was something that was very new and innovative and something that basically women could really afford. So I started working with the company in 2017 as a sex educator, and specifically with a focus on helping people to learn how to use these products and interact with them in the most dynamic way possible so that they could experience the most benefits. Because these products are technologies, sometimes we confuse technology for being something that is going to inherently solve a problem without necessarily interacting with it, in a dynamic way. And so by that, I mean, with sexuality, with orgasm, it's so unique to every single individual person. We all experience our sexuality in different ways, obviously, but there are certain through lines to helping people to experience in a more dynamic way. And so that was what my background was prior to becoming a sex educator, was really in the somatic arts we were talking about before, basically how the inner dynamics of relating to your body from an embodied perspective. So how we breathe, how we express, how we connect specifically with the mind and the body to really unlock that sexual potential. And so it's been a really exciting time working with Satisfyer and kind of seeing the shift within the sexual wellness market, where at first it was incredibly kind of taboo. And we've done so much to really shift the conversation and the lens of the conversation to be focused more on sexual health and specifically the benefits. And finally, how we can incorporate these tools into our lifestyle so they become tools of new awareness, tools that are just as important as your toothbrush or any device that you really use as a wellness resource. And so very excited to be here and really initiating a whole new space. We're going to continue to evolve space in a really exciting way.
Thank you, Megwyn. I think that adds a very important perspective on the topic. I mean, we are all humans, and the human body, the way we feel, the way our body works, I think it's a very important part of sexuality, and technology should be also directed towards the needs of the human body. That's super interesting to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, we have Jeff Bennett here to join us on stage. Jeff is the founder and CEO of Morari Medical, an innovative sexual health and wellness company. And this startup is a pioneer of wearable tech that enables all to create the climatic journey and sexual experience they desire. And I guess, Jeff, you're going to explain to our audience now what that means, right?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks for the opportunity and thanks for having me. What we're developing at Morari and have developed is the world's first chemical-free wearable patch that's intended to delay an ejaculation. And specifically, we're initially attempting to address premature ejaculation, which is the #1 male sexual dysfunction. And 30% of guys suffer from premature ejaculation. But based on our research, there's another sizable percentage of men, roughly 40%, that don't meet a clinical definition of premature ejaculation, but they want to extend the experience. So we're working on a product that uses neural stimulation to basically interfere or temporarily inhibit the nerve signal from the penis to the brain. And what we're finding is, yes, there's a lot of interest in men, but there's also a lot of interest, if not more interest, on the partners, because ultimately it's the partner that's not being satisfied. And I love Megan's company name, Satisfier. We were thinking about different names of our product, and Satisfier was taken. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is sell satisfaction with what we're trying to do. Guys don't want to be told they have a disease, they have a disorder. And what we want to do with our product and our company is make it fun. Let's make sexual wellness and pleasure fun. So we're going to bring fun into the bedroom with a wearable patch, and hopefully create lots of satisfaction with the partners and improve the lives of tens of millions of couples worldwide.
Of talking about that actually is. So you do have to be somewhat flexible in understanding the landscape of where you're telling that story so that you can adjust to how you're telling that story. But to answer your question, yes, actually, I think, aside from going to sex shops, one of the biggest ways that the sexual pleasure product market has grown has been because of private parties. That was one of my first experiences, other than a store that, when you're 18 years old can feel a little bit overwhelming, even though the staff is incredibly knowledgeable and helpful. It can be really embarrassing to ask questions. But when I had a friend who was like, I'm going to throw a party. And then she pulled out a suitcase full of things, and just in that safe space in a friend's house, people could ask questions. And it became okay to do that. And it felt different than being in a store. Now that was, almost 20 years ago that I had that experience, but, and we've moved the needle quite a bit. And I hope that people are now realizing what an incredible resource some of the educators and staff who are attached to brands and small boutiques and shops actually are, because they are an incredibly knowledgeable wealth of information. But the way to do it is to continue to just normalize talking about it. I mean, I can't overstate how important even just the existence of sex tech in pop culture is. I mean, think about how much, Samantha Jones on Sex and the City talking about the rabbit vibrator. Think about how much that moved the needle for conversations for, women talking about sexuality and a place for vibrators. I mean, she called the magic wand what it was. She was like, this is not a back massager. You're fooling yourself. And I had never seen a conversation like that on television. And that, came out when I was in high school, early college. And so for a lot of women of my generation, that really pushed the conversation in a place that we hadn't seen it go yet.
Great. I think because that's a great point to direct this question maybe to Jeff, because Jeff, you have your own product and you experience, you have been in the business for so many years. Do you see a shift in the perspective on, it is it's not easy for us men to talk about certain topics because men have to be strong. There's a certain cliche that we have also to fulfill somehow. I have a feeling, at least here in Germany, at least, I don't know. But Jeff, how is your perspective on the topic? Is this perspective changing, or do we still have a long way ahead of us? Or
I still think we have a long road ahead of us, but I absolutely think it's changing. And I just want to be clear, we're not commercial with our product yet. We're still pre-revenue. We're still in the development phase. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Looking forward to that day. But I think it's changing, whether it's things like the CES show where Rachel was a big part of, getting that movement to allow SexTech to be there at one of the largest electronics, technology company or conferences in the world. And many of the headlines coming out of that were SexTech related. It wasn't, drones. It wasn't artificial intelligence. It was SexTech. Whether it's companies like Roman and Hims, now arguably they're getting a lot of social media coverage, which is a double standard. But what they're doing is really normalizing those conversations to make it happen. We were fortunate to be a guest on a top-rated morning radio show a couple months ago where we spent 20 minutes, and I was using words such as ejaculation on public radio.
There's a question. It is to me, what's the best way to spark a healthy conversation about sex or sexuality and sex technology when you live in a conservative and traditional society or country? I definitely think Megan and Jeff will also have interesting thoughts here, especially Megan as an educator. I think to me, it comes down to cultural competency. Like you have to be able to look at the culture that you are existing in or trying to communicate with to determine what kind of message is going to resonate with that group of people. It may mean a gentler approach that is still direct, and it may mean a very direct and aggressive or humorous approach. It can really very broadly, but for a conservative society, I think with opening up and or why someone needs to about this or to even get open to what you have to say. I think Thomas said something really poignant. Jeff said something really poignant that like we all came from sex, right? So if we can start with that, then we have to be able to start a conversation, however gently that may be.
No, similarly, it's been really interesting because we're a global company. So the way we have conversations around sex is so different here in America than like, say, South America or even different parts of Europe. So I think learning about those cultures as best as you can, trying to orient yourself around some of the common cultural beliefs or the myths around sex and kind of understanding what those are. And then from that, you can then utilize, research and data to help deconstruct some of those beliefs, not by saying you're wrong, but just by saying, well, actually, there was a really interesting research study that was done that actually shows that using sexual devices actually enhances sexual satisfaction, and really kind of arming yourself a little bit with that information and of course adjusting your tone as needed. But I think it's a really important question that was asked, and that has been a really important key to really broadening the discussion, is really looking at how we can educate and have those conversations across cultures. And then, of course, I think another piece is also giving them that experiential information, like, oh, did you know that, some of the most powerful orgasms, for instance, are experienced through prostate stimulation, to kind of overcome that myth about anal play, and to giving them actual, input on how to use a pleasure device to basically interact with their body in a unique way that makes them want to lean in and say, oh, I want to try that. Like, but giving them as much as you can what it would be like to experience that. And that's obviously hard to do. But I think that that's an important piece because that creates that curiosity. So maybe they're not ready right now, but at some point later on, they're like, okay, I want to maybe try,
Yeah, and I think you touch on something important about the like mythologies around sex and sexuality. I sometimes in trying to like open up a conversation, I just like to ask questions like, well, why do you think that? Like, why do you believe that that's true? And the more you force people to like say things out loud about their beliefs, the more you're able to say, okay, so if that's, you know, where you're coming from, then, you know, let me present you with this actual research that is not opinion based or based in, you know, steeped in culture or, you know, some kind of you know, group assumption, something that is actually based in scientific research that gives you something else to consider. And with that, like, can you, you know, walk away from this conversation and think about that piece of information and then, you know, maybe come back to it later. Maybe, you know, you're not necessarily going to change this person's mind right away, but hopefully by presenting them, you know, with some sort of research or something that that they can leave with, you may have, you know, incrementally moved that person in a direction that they'll be ready to talk about something else come the next time, or they'll at least be more open to it the next time it crosses their paths.
Yeah, I would agree. And, you know, as I said earlier in the panel discussion, you know, we found that using humor definitely opens things up. I mean, because once you get through that initial barrier and that guard comes down a little bit, it's amazing how many people are willing to share information then or ask questions. And, you know, pre-COVID, I mean, whether it's neighborhood parties or gatherings, you know, my poor wife, she just got tired of hearing about the questions that people ask. Like, oh my God, do I have to answer this again? So, but at first it was tough, right? It was tough to have those conversations. And for me personally, it was, I had to struggle with kind of coming out, if you will, and kind of being this person, that face, that voice of men's sexual health. But I'll tell you, it's been so liberating. So whether it's you're trying to start a company in the sex tech space, or whether you're trying to, you know, find a product or a solution or technology for your own personal needs, once you make that step, and I acknowledge it's not easy. It's you have to rationalize in your mind you want to do this. You know, your friends, your family, but once it's done, it's quite liberating, and you know you can make a difference, whether it's in your own personal life or the lives of others.
Yeah, I think it's the vulnerability that you offer to people by opening yourself up to be like, you know, I'm the PE guy, or I'm the guy that's like willing to talk about this at barbecues and parties. But it's also the relatability, right? Like it's that you are willing to talk about something that is actually incredibly relatable, and like allowing yourself to be the person to, you know, be the host of that topic, that people gravitate to that. And that's where that humor is really helpful. Humor is really relatable. Talking about, you know, problems or things that you experience makes things really relatable. And like people really just want to hear that they're not alone in something. And if you can offer that to them, then you can really open up the conversation to just about anything, because you've shared an experience that tells them it's okay to talk about because you're not alone. I've experienced this as well.
Just a little thing I wanted to say to the audience. Start streaming, become a part of this discussion. This is your chance. Join us. It would be super fun, and it would be lovely to meet you, so to say, in person. If there's any question, jump on board. That would be nice. Thanks. Jeff, you were talking about like normalizing the topic, or all of you did. Do you also think that like it could have an impact on education, like for younger people, children, teenagers? I mean, we live in this kind of world where it's not allowed to talk about these topics openly, but then you have a porn industry, you know, and it's very easily accessible for youngsters. And wouldn't it help make it a normal topic that they could talk about with their friends and parents and whatnot? I think that could be super helpful also for our society in general.
I absolutely agree. And it's a question of, you know, how young is too young in order to have these conversations. I think in the US last week, there was this video that kind of went viral and it was talked about on Fox News about, teaching about masturbation in 6th grade, I think it was, or 6 years old. Again, I don't know what that age is, but I think there's absolutely an opportunity for the industry to develop some educational materials and get those into people's hands earlier rather than later. And we've got a great tool to do that with, video and audio, and not necessarily rely on the schools to do that or the parents, because a lot of times parents don't have these, they're not comfortable with it. So there is an opportunity to get that education out there, which I think helps to normalize it. And, it really starts with what Megan's doing in her experiences. This is physiology. Let's understand about physiology, anatomy, get comfortable with that, and then, begin that education around that. Because again, it's something everybody does, everybody likes. In our case, humans are the only species in the world that want to delay an ejaculation. Every other animal is about getting it done quick and moving on. But the reality is that humans want to delay it. So
I heard about there's some nasty things with dogs, and they have these techniques to keep. I don't it's crazy. They want to keep the female dog as long as possible. Somehow, I don't know. Yeah, great. Thanks. Shall I read out some questions that the audience wrote in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay. So from Lorena Prieto. To everyone, how to manage sexual education in terms of pleasure, orgasm, and sex tech in countries such as Peru, where even basic sexual and reproductive health is not covered. I think that's what we were talking about, I guess. But now it's maybe a little bit more from a political perspective. Is there something you want to add to this or mention?
Well, I think, a huge part of that is really partnering with people that are in those places, because obviously if we're in different spaces, we don't really have a connection going on in those cultures. So I think working with whether it's a PR agency or whether it's some kind of influencer and developing that connection, and then developing those educational tools. I think videos work really well. There's a company here that I saw called Stand We Speak, and I was really impressed with the sex ed that they had. These wonderful cartoons that really go into a lot of these kind of topics. And I think tools like that are really helpful because it's maybe a little bit disarming to kind of learn about something through a cartoon, or again, through an influencer that's having a conversation where you're not necessarily in the room, having that conversation with them. I know that we were also part of CEW Cosmetic Executive Women event recently, and someone that was there talked about how they were creating also email content and sharing it with their email list. And what they were really impressed with was that the open rate was much higher with sexual wellness than it was with their previous companies. And so sometimes you might think that people aren't curious or don't want to know, but if you give them avenues where they where they can be anonymous, right, where they don't have to show themselves and they can learn about the information, and thankfully we have the internet. So I don't, again, know some places may not have access to those particular tools, but I think through the internet is probably one of the most valuable tools. And then just having those conversations, we talked about this before, but just remember that as you open up and have those conversations around sex, you give permission for others to do it. So even though it can be really scary and intimidating, just know that you're helping to kind of, give permission to others to really open up to having those conversations.
Thank you. I think Lex has been waiting to pitch or have a question for us. Maybe Lex, if you could turn on your camera and jump into the conversation. Yes. Hi, welcome.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I've been really enjoying your chat and hearing nuances of the industry. I'm actually a CEO of a company that does sex industry research. And so I would love to understand more about what are some of the challenges been for understanding new opportunities in the market, and how have you navigated doing any kind of market research and finding new segments for the industry?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take a first crack at that, Lex. Good question. And when we formed our company, we were focused on solving premature ejaculation for men. We thought it was a male issue, it's a men's issue. But as we got into it and did some research with partners, we quickly realized, well, wait a second here. Who's not getting satisfied in this? It's not the guy. In many cases, the guy just wants to be done, roll over, go to bed. But it's the partner that's not being satisfied, whether that partner is a male or female. So that caused us not necessarily to pivot, but really to rethink our messaging and our approach to how we're going to market this product. And yes, there's the messaging around the male, but that messaging we found through the research is guys don't want to be told they've got a problem. They don't want to be labeled as a premature ejaculator. They just want to be told, hey, there's a new product that could enhance the experience of pleasure in the bedroom. But then there's that partner side of thing that we uncovered, tried to do more research. And one of the findings that we did in a survey with women is we asked them on average, how long do you want your partner to last before ejaculation? And we use simple tools. We use SurveyMonkey. You have a database of several hundred people. So we started simple. You don't have to go extreme, but you can start something simple. And we asked that question, and on average, the women said, I want my partner to last 8 minutes on average. And we were surprised by that, and I don't know why we were surprised, but what that told us is that, well, there's 30% of men that meet the clinical definition of premature ejaculation, which is ejaculation of 2 minutes or under. But maybe you last 4 minutes. Clinically, you're not defined as having premature ejaculation, but if your partner wants you to last 8, well, there's a whole other market right there that our product could solve in delaying. So no longer do we think of the market as 30% of guys, we think of another 40% that want to extend the experience. Therefore, that's 70%. 7 out of 10 men walking around this world at some point want to extend the experience, either because they or their partner's interested in that. So for us, that research was key to really hone in on who is the influencer, who's the buyer of this product, and ultimately who's not being satisfied.
Yeah, I've some of my clients have run some really interesting research that is connected to their like emotional value of sexuality, as well as their like personal perceptions of their own education, which varies quite broadly, but it does give you some insight into what the customer is looking for. I've seen some of my clients run surveys that, ask specifically about like the orgasm gap. Like, do you perceive that your partner is experiencing orgasms easier or more frequently than you are? Do you perceive that outside of your partnership with other, do you think that other people are experiencing different than you, or do you think that you are experiencing something similarly? How confident are you in your own understanding of your physiology? Questions like, do you know where your G-spot is? Or do you know where that erogenous tissue is, right? Because there is some, there is new-ish data around like what the G-spot actually is. But understanding people's individual relationship with their own physiology and comfortability with exploration. I think a lot of what I've seen as a result of that is that a lot of sex tech companies use this exploratory language, right? Like they're not assuming that you either know or don't know something about yourself. They're letting you know that this device is available for you to explore as you see fit, because you ultimately should be the person who is responsible for knowing your body. That's another really cool thing about sex tech, is that there's this empowerment to own your sexuality and to really own your pleasure, to use a phrase that is a tagline for some. And I think that's a pretty cool opportunity for some of that research as well, because it puts it in the hands of the consumer and of the individuals as well. And, you know, to connect it to the earlier question, it also tells you when you're in different cultures and different markets, how to meet the customer where they are at, because it's going to be different.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We were running some sex ed research in Latin America, and it was really fascinating because what we thought would be, you know, the best practices for developing surveys is like the most sensitive information at the very bottom of the survey, so that you like prime them all down this nice funnel. And what was really funny is that sensitive question talking about sexuality, you know, and we're finding that we're starting to have to develop very different kinds of methodologies to actually access these taboo data. And, you know, and it varies by culture, you know, whether we do a Spanish language survey, it varies how we, you know, structure the survey, we use, how we navigate the cultural landscape, you know, and it's been kind of a very fascinating experience understanding what really drives people. And not just from a biological perspective, but from a shame perspective, from any kind of barriers for even getting information, from, you know, how they were, you know, socialized growing up. So I think like what's really cool about this space is that it really is wide open, because people don't know enough about what's possible. We keep replicating what we already do, right? We make a lot of, you know, phallic objects, or we make, you know, fake vaginas, or we make, you know, some of the tools that keep getting recycled and like featured and all this stuff. So there's so much green space, or blue space, I guess, using the terminology, for real innovation in this space.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump into, as an educator, I've definitely done a lot of research just on like various, you know, studies and surveys. We did conduct a recent survey throughout the pandemic, just to kind of get a sense of like how people's sexual lives had perhaps shifted because of the pandemic. And there was some like very interesting data, like for instance, about 25% of people that were surveyed that were in couples actually recorded higher sexual satisfaction during the pandemic, like, you know, having that time at home. But there were a lot of assumptions, at least when I was interviewed, you know, in different media interviews, that people's sex lives had actually depreciated. So it wasn't necessarily the case. I think that, you know, people being home and having more free time, looking at these kind of devices in different types of ways, you know, perspectives really shifted. But there was one study that I really found super interesting recently that was done by a sociologist by the name of Lauman, that I'd like to dig in more, and I think it's relevant for a lot of other companies, was that it was a global sexual survey that was really looking at sexual satisfaction. And one of the key findings was actually that in cultures that were more gender equal, there was greater sexual satisfaction than cultures that were more male dominated. And I was really excited when I saw that, because it was like, wow, this is actually research and data, right, that we can use to kind of shift because you know, couples want to experience more sexual satisfaction, both for men and for women. So that's one I think that's really great to look at. And then another really awesome study was done by OMGS, which is a really amazing site. Maybe you already know about that, but I really love digging into their research and kind of looking more at like the nuances of pleasure, how, you know, it's focused more on women's pleasure, but like how women like to masturbate, you know, the different components that go into their experience, incorporating things like breath, as we were talking about before, but also different forms of stimulation. And so that's, you know, something that I like to share with people, you know, sometimes in interviews. So I think getting acquainted with a lot of these surveys and then working with different, working with media, working with your PR agency on helping to kind of bridge those touch points is so helpful, because we're really needing to connect those dots, you know, and not just talk about how amazing our own products are, but really broadening, you know, the understanding.
You also touch on something that we're dancing around a little bit here, and that's that, like, that you really can't, and I'm looking at one of the comments in the chat as well, you really can't separate this topic from like the equality and equity piece among genders. Like it's actually, you can't have a conversation about sexuality without also examining the social construct of what the result of sex is. And in many cases, that is family building and family planning. And so if you're working backwards from like reproductive rights, or like what the culture of family planning or the culture of the result of sex is in a particular place, like you have to be able to examine the roles that that the people are operating within, because that is coloring the assumptions and the mythologies that they are operating, you know, of. You know, there's this larger conversation has to be coupled with sex positivity, and that has to be coupled with this, you know, giving people access to education, because that's also a conversation of autonomy, and that's a conversation of equality over time, and equal access to healthcare, and you know, all of the other things that come with it. So it's you know, it's connected to every piece of well-being, because, you know, well-being has to be connected to your mental health as well as to your like everyday well-being of your, you know, economic, social security, you know, your security in your like living in a safe place, having a safe environment for your family, a safe environment for yourself to exist. Those things are all inextricably linked.
Totally.
I got a follow-up question for Megan and Rachel. I'm interested in your feedback on this as well. But, you know, Megan, you talked about some of the studies around satisfaction. And do you, I mean, I guess my hypothesis is that satisfaction is so personal. You know, what's important for you is going to be different than Rachel than it is for me. And, you know, as an industry, you know, how do we really develop products around that allow for that individualization of it, whether it's, you know, multiple settings or different shapes, different colors, etc. I mean, how, in your experience, is there a lot of variation in satisfaction levels?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this, you know, the study that I mentioned, I don't remember all of the specific metrics on how they measured sexual satisfaction, but it did have more to do with like sexual performance, which I don't like that word necessarily, but like, you know, lubrication, sexual arousal, blood flow, and those kinds of things. So I think that, yes, it is such a unique experience. Like, for instance, we know that 10 to 15% of women are actually able to orgasm just through thinking alone, you know, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be focused on genital thoughts. It can actually be people thinking about pastoral scenes. But I think that really it's a broader discussion on how we experience that ability to allow pleasure to be experienced within the body and within the nervous system. So for some, maybe they need more of an ambiance, a setting, or more context, you know, something that's more context driven. But I think ultimately there's a lot of fluidity within sexual satisfaction, and that's another piece of the conversation. Like, when it satisfied me in my 20s, you know, probably doesn't satisfy me now in my 40s. But ultimately really recognizing that we can experience sexual satisfaction well into our aging years, and that, yes, it can differ, you know, depending on what our experience level is. But really, of course, there is an embodied component, there is a physiological component. So really addressing all of that, I think, is important as well. It's such a great thing to have a conversation around. And, you know, obviously, I think in the future, the whole line of sexual wellness will also even be blurred. Maybe it will be called sensual wellness, you know, because it doesn't necessarily have to only relate, again, to, you know, a high peak of arousal in my genitals. It can be a transcendental experience. You know, we know that orgasm is a transcendental kind of experience, and you can experience that through all sorts of different ways. So even what we call orgasm, I think will probably shift in how we're looking at all of this. But obviously the genitals and the nervous system and all these things play a huge role and are part of that, you know, understanding.
Do you feel like emotional applications,
yes,
apps that talk to you and these kinds of things that take care for you, could it also be part of this new definition of sex tech?
Yeah, I mean, the emotional component to sexuality is, you know, is implicit. I mean, I think that even when people say they're, you know, they're having sex without sort of an emotional connection, there's still some emotion experienced, whether it's just a feeling of joy, of pleasure. So, you know, we are so complex in terms of how we experience emotional energy. And I think that obviously the more inclusive we can become around the full spectrum of our emotions, and I think that that's a huge shift that needs to happen, especially for men, you know, that kind of tap down on their emotional expression, or just culturally speaking, not all men, but just so that's a, you know, that's a huge component. And just from a physiological perspective, a really interesting insight that I think a lot of innovators out there of sex tech will find fascinating is that we process information in emotional information in really interesting ways. So for instance, slow touch actually mediates a connection to the emotional part of our brain, and allows us to also get subtle forms of emotional information through our interactions. So things like that could be something that we could develop, for instance, you know, sexual wellness technology that could help people that are dealing with emotional issues. And I think there are some companies here that are working on that, but really looking again at all the different facets. Like one other one, again, we were talking about music before, but like the cochlea within our ear, the way it hears information is kind of more like a musical instrument. And they've done now studies looking at, you know, how music can actually impact the physiological connections within the body. So we're just barely scratching the surface in terms of what's possible in the development of sensual wellness technology, right? Because again, it doesn't have to be only reserved to the genitals. In fact, I think this whole upper center is a whole untapped region, right? We know we can experience orgasm just through kissing. So perhaps there's things there that can be developed, but yeah, there's unlimited possibilities.
Yeah, all of that, but I also just, you know, love again that there's these different entry points, people at like where their comfort point is, and that allows them to explore where they go. Like for folks, you know, they may have experienced something that turns them off to a particular kind of stimulation, be that porn or you know, maybe a lot of physical touch, actually quite for some people because they've experienced some sort of trauma. And so I think that adding in innovative things like audio erotica, that, you know, there's a number of apps out there that have a variety of kinds of audio erotica, whether it's like direct communication or you're listening to somebody else, or if it's ASMR, that allows somebody to approach a person might be a little bit adjustable for them, and helps them to explore a safe way that's going to make them comfortable, or discover something new that may turn them on. I mean, I think we can take a lot of cues from the kink community that a lot of people are maybe not necessarily comfortable with talking about right out the gates. Like they have to warm up to get there. But I think if you look in those communities at some of the dialogues around different things that different people like, you discover that there's just this whole variety of entry points for what turns people on. And it's just like our brains are our like biggest pleasure point, and that is like your brain is your sex toy, right? Like it's all happening there, and for different people it's going to be stimulated in different ways. So, you know, I think it's really exciting to be able to include all of these different kinds of technologies into the world of sex tech.
Guys, if there's any questions in the audience, please come on stage, ask them. I can see there are some questions, but it would be really great if you could come on stage. Juliana, maybe this is for you. You have a product-related question. Here's your chance to come online. If not, I can also read it out. I have a question more product related on prototyping. How do you separate good results when there's this education? Okay, she has troubles with the video. When there's this education conversation bias, how to assess which good outcomes come from the product which is being tested itself instead of coming from exactly the boldness of finally having a conversation exchange on information in such a taboo topic for users. Who wants to go for it?
I'll take a stab at that. I mean, I think ultimately with whatever product works, then great. That's if you're looking for that pleasure, you're looking for that satisfaction. You know, again, what works in one group of study participants may not work for you because it's so individual. And is, you know, we think about what we're doing here is if at the end of the day, all that our product allows someone to do is have a conversation about their sexual relationship that they've never had before, then that's a winner right there. Now, of course, we want to take it beyond that and, you know, give all the benefits of what we're trying to do. But if this is a tool that enables those conversations to happen, that's a good thing. But it is so personal, so individual in our experience that there's not a one size fits all. And that's why we're taking an approach of, you know, we're going to give the user the ability to change multiple different parameters, experience what works for them. Because we could spend millions of dollars and, you know, years worth of effort to find the perfect setting. Well, that perfect setting is for one person. May not work for everybody.
Great. Are there more questions from the audience? People, this is your chance, 5 minutes to go. So the other day we were, like, I'm still with this emotional intelligence thing. We were talking about the movie Hers, where a guy falls in love with his operating system. And I mean, the movie, in the end, it brings together the operating system tries to connect him with another human. And that's very positive about the movie. But do you guys, now we have talked about all the benefits and the nice future for technology, but where's the limits? Where do you see the limits? If we fall in love with our devices, is that a no-go, or is it something that can heal us and give us positive feedback? What is your opinion on that?
I would just say, I guess I thought a lot about this, and you know, I still have a lot to think about with this one, but I think one of the key things is, you know, where technology might become addictive. And, you know, when we're using those addictive circuits, we're actually overriding our pleasure circuits. So what we think of is maybe being pleasurable, but maybe it's more of like a quick fix kind of experience, could actually be impairing our ability to experience pleasure. So I think really looking at that, like how, you know, is the technology, are people using the technology simply because there's this kind of immediate hit, or is it something that's perhaps supporting more sustainable pleasure? So that's sort of where I would draw the line. and say that, you know, that's something that we really have to look at, especially in the age that we're living in, where, you know, addiction is rampant in a lot of different things, like from social media to porn addiction. And, you know, even though sexuality should be freely explored and there really isn't a limit, because I want to make sure people understand that when I talk about like addiction, you can experience addiction when it comes to sexuality, but that's not necessarily because you're having a lot of sex and you have a high libido. It's because you're going to sex to fulfill a need that isn't necessarily actually being fulfilled by sex, if that makes sense. So it's, again, overriding that true pleasure system. And we need our pleasure system. Pleasure system is so essential to our health. It's a part of the way we reset. Without pleasure, right, we would just be completely under undue stress. We would be depressed. We would lose a lot of confidence. We wouldn't be able to interact with others. So it's a really essential component to our health. And I think educating people more on that and helping people to understand, like, just, you know, looking at addiction, I suppose, in relationship to technology.
I also think we have, in addition to everything that Megan said, again, the bigger picture of something like Her, with that movie that I see, is an examination of like human loneliness and the ways that technology is potentially moving us closer to this like loneliness epidemic. And I think we have an opportunity right now to examine what the past year and a half of living through a pandemic has done psychologically for a lot of human behaviors. And we're already starting to see some of those studies emerge. I just read a study from, I think she was a clinical psychologist at UCLA. I actually have it open. It's a professor who studied loneliness and you know, published a report on how our like brains and hormones and our bodies have reacted as a result of what's going on right now. And so I think we can, as terrible as this pandemic has been for everybody, I think we are going to find some key learnings from it that can and should be taken into account as we continue to develop these technologies that are intended to make people's lives better, and potentially take into account some of the things that we may have disregarded just for the sake of technological advancement. You know, there's a lot. Like our brains are have undergone a really important transformation, I think.
Yeah.
There's one more question regarding teledildonics and yeah, if this kind of COVID situation kind of pushed us further into further away from personal interaction with love dolls, sex toys, and so on. I think that's what, yeah.
Oh, I see it. Sorry, there's two sections where there's questions appearing. I mean, yeah,
kind of
I think
the same question, I guess.
I think what Ilya is asking is actually what I was touching on. I do have some concerns about people moving further away from personal interaction. I can't scientifically quantify those concerns right here and right now. That is not my expertise, but I have been looking to experts and in behavior and physiology for some of those cues. I think we'll start to see that more. But I think that all those toys, there has to be a give and take, right? All devices do provide something, but there is also an exchange on the other side as well. And so, like anything, sugar You have to experience things that are pleasurable with the understanding that, you know, there may be consequences as well. There may be health consequences, like very real ones, similarly to, you know, the having you know, getting a heart condition from consuming too much of certain kinds of fats, or, you know, becoming hypoglycemic or hyperglycemic, you know, diabetic as a result of too much sugar. Like our bodies will react to the things that we overstimulate them with.
Okay, Rudolf was also talking about his scientific paper. Rudolf, do you here on stage and tell us yourself, like to give us a short glimpse or a short overview about what you were thinking or elaborating on in your papers? That would be a chance, because we're almost a little bit over time. So maybe that could be a last chance. And at least us, like the organizers of the event, we would officially close the event, but we can leave this room open for further discussion. But the official time would be over, so to say. This would be like after show hangout, so to say. Ah, okay. Rudolf has problems with his internet. He's a maker. He's into hacking sex toys and so on, and it's really interesting what he's doing. So, yeah. Is there something else we want to talk about, or some topics?
So many things.
I guess just my comments on the kind of artificial intelligence, robotics. You know, I think there's a lot of value in technology, right? I mean, there's so many unmet needs that exist in the sexual health and wellness category right now. I'm not sure robots are the answer right now, because so much of that sexual experience is person to person, intimate. And if you go down the path, and I admit I need to learn more about it, but you know, there's a place for robots in the world for sure. But in the bedroom, I'm not sure, because I think that just, you know, moves that loneliness factor even further down. And you know, but again, there's a lot to be learned. Perhaps there's opportunities there that I'm not thinking of, but I just think that it's such a personal, intimate experience that you potentially can't, you know, factor in the temperature, the smell, the audio part of things. I mean, there's some limitations there.